Prey feels like it was conceived in a particularly fruitful brainstorming session, but instead of the inevitable stage of practical implementation where we see that some of the ideas were actually awful and some won't work with each other, all of them work perfectly and get implemented. It's not true, of course, things don't work like that, especially in game development. But the ambitious mind game that Prey's team created, when told to work on this IP, did lead to a world that is so well detailed, lived in, and interactive in surprising ways that I would have believed it if someone told me. It was released on 2017 May 5th, the second game in Arkane's catalog that for no reason other than publisher meddling had to use the name of a pre-existing IP. The other one being Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. In Prey's case, it's very funny because Bethesda actually ended the development of Prey 2, deleted all their work, and then Arkane had to make a Prey game. It's kind of like capping a pizza maker, getting a pasta chef to make pasta in that place, but still calling it a pizzeria. Don't you love it when publishers kneecap their own games? They did give free rein to the developers though, it just had to be on a space station and had to have aliens. And they delivered on that, the space station being Talos 1 and the aliens being the Typhon life form that I inhabited. There aren't many similarities between the two Preys other than that, though the 2006 Prey does feature some mind-bending parts as well. It's much more on rails than the new Prey whose mind games are for the player to find at their own pace. Except for the start of the game. The iconic opening of Prey is by far the most linear and guided portion of the game. There isn't really much to do other than follow a linear path. The opening's kind of long as well. I much prefer just getting dropped in the world. But Prey's opening is just so clever, so meticulously detailed that I can't help but love it. The game starts with you getting ready for your first day at work with your brother. You go to the roof and take off in a helicopter. Meet your brother and you are sent to do a series of tests. You are given million tasks like any video game tutorial would give you. But there's something wrong with the researchers, namely Dr. Bellamy was with the legendary Typhon Russell. They aren't exactly happy with your results.
I'm sorry, can someone please explain to me what's happening? Simmons?
I installed exactly what Tina brought down.
Did you double check?
Speaker's still on.
I apologize, Morgan. We're having some trouble with the equipment. Not your fault. You're doing fabulous, actually. One last room. Let's step into D.
And in your last test, this happens.
Is my coffee? It's empty.
Oh my god! Security! Security!
And then you wake up again. But something's off. You find a dead worker outside and a wrench. And well, you are being repeatedly told to get out of your room. The door to your balcony is shut, so you hit the glass, which breaks. All this reveals an extremely detailed simulation, and the best part of the game is that it is lying to you, but also not. All of the most creative parts of the simulation happen in-game. It's brilliant. It adds a layer of believability in terms of physicality to the world, but the world is lying to you. Hell, you can notice the scratch marks from the wall moving from the very start of the game. The looking glass tech simulates depth and matches the view of the person from one side. It's there, it's technology that exists in the world. And Prey uses that amazingly well. There will be spoilers for the rest of the game of Prey ahead, you have been warned. The level of detail in the world in Prey's opening carries over to the rest of the game. It's an extremely well designed world, both in terms of how it feels to traverse and its overall look. In fact, a specialized role was created in the studio for this very purpose, the level architect. Their job is to basically make the whole design of the level make sense. The role is kind of like bridging the level designers with the environment designers. It gives Prey's world a sense of realism and liveliness that massively contribute to the immersion. The general art direction of the game itself is excellent. You can see the opulence in places like the lobby or executive suite. Small things like the various RPG notes of the crew members or this weird glue gun creation all adds a feeling of being an actual space used by people with their own personalities. The world itself looks great. We start the game at the Neuromod division, and beyond the simulation you're in, the Neuromod section's offices themselves are interesting. The floors are wooden, there's a lot of furniture laying around, and there's more than just utilitarianism here. The offices look like expensive offices on Earth, and there's not really much to immediately give away that it's in space. But it's the lobby that hits you with the opulence of Talos 1. The lobby is huge, the statues of two golden lions, decorations hanging from the ceiling, seating areas with expensive furniture, and well-furnished and equipped offices stretching both sides of the stairwell. I love this about Prey. There's an ongoing crisis, but the crisis has started recently enough that the decay hasn't started yet. Imagine the cost of just transporting wood and leather from Earth, which are already expensive. The wealth of Transtar is on full display, and they are a wealthy bunch, a very rich mega corporation. A direct quote from lead designer Ricardo Bear says, if Elon Musk had the money to make a space station or if Google did, it would be like that. So it's probably more Google than Elon Musk due to the distinct lack of Reddit memes littering the station. But it also has some direct inspiration from 1960s look. Specifically, Ricardo Bear mentions what President Kennedy might have seen in his time, who in Prey's alternate timeline didn't get assassinated. The wealth isn't really limited to money either. Technologies like the looking glass or the massive arboretum, which is just the art-like park in space, the elevator technology, the various research levels like hardware labs, neuromod division or psychotronics are filled with advanced research, which we can find in terms of audio logs and even just the equipment. All of these research levels, which run the chance of being samey, even have slight color accent differences that makes it easier to just differentiate at a glance. Like Psychotronics has a lot of green, Hardware Labs has a lot of red and orange and so on. Even the crew is color coordinated. Like we play Morgan in a red suit he wears cause he is an executive. Blue and black for security, green and white for science and technology and so on. And in parts you can even see signs that it was the originally the Russian ship Kletka. Prey's world is pretty massive for being just on a space station and slowly opens up to the player area by area. There is also secrets hidden by other crew members all throughout the station. Space is an exotic location, and have you ever visited an exotic location if you haven't tried your hand at smuggling? So of course there is a hidden smuggling ring. All of this is enhanced by the sound design of the game. There's a droning ambience to each of the areas, and sometimes it's punctuated by something hitting the space station. The sounds are excellent. Going through a level, hearing all the enemies, the phantoms speaking in garbled human words, the corrupted robots with the eerie voice, it's all great. The soundtrack itself is also really suitable for the game. It has a few of the so-called bangers, but overall it's creepy and ambient, fits the tone of the game. I do have problem with the sound however, like the environmental effects cut off way too fast. In fact, it cuts off fast enough to be noticeable and annoying. The station itself is well connected. Guts can be used to access the arboretum from hardware labs, but once the elevator is fixed, the lobby becomes another way to reach it. The lobby has direct connections to half the places, and the other half is directly connected to the arboretum. And places like the storage bay can be accessed from the outside in the space. It's possible to explore the whole of outside of the station from space as well. It's great. The term open world has been used to describe Prey by some, but director Rafael Colantonio didn't use that term because it might create the wrong player association and impressions. The station feels like it has a purpose beyond just serving as the player space to run wild in. But yeah, you can of course run wild in it. The way Prey works is similar to the System Shock games. Hell, a common point of discussion in the community is how it's a shock-like and should have been called something like Neuroshock. It's simple why it's thought so really. You are given a station which you unlock level by level, you get powers and abilities over time, you are given goals and it's up to you how you will do them. There's freedom in problem solving and exploration, though the lack of showdown here is noted. In terms of overall gameplay, Prey is very much an immersive sim. People who know what they are probably have complex thought on what they are, but for those who don't, a simple explanation is that immersive sims are games that build up an immersive world or levels, the objectives in which are approachable in multiple ways using tools the player has in relation to interaction with the level design, AI and physics of the game. Prey takes the looking glass philosophy of original immersive sim devs and adds to that some of the most creative and unique powers I have seen. Let's start with the glue gun, Prey's most interesting weapon. It shoots out a liquid projectile that attaches to a surface, hardens and solidifies. It can attach itself to the vast majority of the surfaces in the game. Some exceptions include glass and its own hardened projectiles. It can be used to open paths to a lot of places, closing leaks, stopping faulty electrical boxes, stopping enemies in place, and dropping flying enemies by dealing damage, you name it. This is one of the most versatile tools in any game, and each part of its use case feels natural. If it was an ingredient, it would be butter. And hey, if you are lactose intolerant, the game lets you play the whole thing without using the glue gun once, though it will be hard. You start the game with the wrench, and after you freeze enemies in place with glue, the wrench is a great tool to thwack them with. Though the wrench leads to my problem with the fact that the game has stamina and swinging the wrench consumed it. Which is like why? Why does the game have stamina? This makes melee combat literally like Dark Souls. And no, it doesn't. Being in melee range is dangerous regardless. And the only other reason for the stamina bar is to prevent sprinting long distances, which is a weird decision cause the sprint is generous enough to run out of danger but not generous enough to backtrack fast, which the game has a lot of. The two more conventional weapons of the game, the shotgun and the pistol, are good as well. The pistol does okay damage and I like the sound. It feels sharp even though it's silenced. And being silenced is a great weapon to use during stealth. The shotgun is great though. The sound is boomy and it hits for a ton of damage, and fully upgraded can last through the entire game. The Q-beam is kinda unwieldy, but it's great for long range consistent damage. Then there's also the Hunter's Bolt Caster, which is less of a weapon and more of a tool. It's great for opening doors long range as it has enough weight to push buttons, and I recently discovered effective for taking down cystoids. The only weapon I don't like is the Disruptor Stun Gun. It's like it does little damage and has no range. It doesn't even kill the robot enemies in a hit and takes a whole lot of time to recharge. It's straight up not a good weapon. The EMP grenade is more useful, but it only temporarily deactivates the robot enemies, which means the robot enemies are a pain to deal with all the way through. It's like fighting mosquitoes, but the game refuses to give you more than a rolled up magazine, or more like an electrically charged rolled up magazine. There are two other throwables in Prey, the recycler charge and the null wave emitter. The recycler charge is probably my favorite weapon in the game. Its usefulness is only second to the glue gun. The recycler charge literally deletes enemies and spews out recycled materials. It does the same to obstacles blocking the player's path as well. It's really fun to just see the charge at work. It's a really cool effect and sound, but on the other hand, the recycling aspect also doesn't help the balancing in late game, which I will come back to later. And if you don't want to fight at all, just get some turrets and they will do the job for you.
Eradicator Auto-Turret version 0.7.6 online.
The last weapon I have left to talk about is the null wave transmitter. This is really useful against bigger Typhons as it prevents for a short time the Typhon's abilities usage. These Typhons are the main enemies spread throughout the game. They broke out of containment. They mostly appear as a black mass. The Typhon were first discovered in Prey's world in 1958, when the cosmonauts of Verona 1 satellite were killed by this hostile life form. The particular life forms in question are the mimics, the most iconic of Prey's enemies and the most creative. Mimics can turn into any objects around the station. They can visually mimic the look of anything, and in the first few hours, the only tell that there is a mimic is the sound. Besides being extremely stealthy, they are fast and agile. A great enemy overall, means it's pretty important to keep on your toes going through each location. They are completely unscripted, so that makes them unpredictable as well. The phantoms are the more general enemy in the game. They are fast, however, and can quickly cover distances by dashing, and on longer ranges they attack with telekinetic orbs, which can be dodged. There are variations of the phantoms, stronger than the base version. The etheric phantoms, which leaves a toxic cloud upon death and can duplicate the electricity based voltaic phantoms, and the fire based thermal phantoms are there as well. One on one, all of them are pretty easy. More than one can be an issue. It's the bigger Typhons, like the telepath and the technopath, that can be a roadblock. They can control humans and robots respectively, have very powerful range attacks and a ton of health. Technopaths also cause malfunctions in all the electronics surrounding it. The telepath also has very strong close range attacks. The Typhon ecosystem itself is created by weavers. They create a coral, a gold translucent web with unknown purpose, and can create phantoms from corpses and poltergeists, which throw the player around and are invisible a lot of the time. They appear rarely and are my favorite enemies in the game. They are also known to create telepaths and technopaths. They also spawn cystoids as protection, small exploding Typhon particles that follow movement and explode upon reaching the player. It surrounds itself with various nets of these cystoids which emit radiation. It can even shield itself from physical attacks completely, at which time it causes a status effect called fear on the player. The last and largest enemy in the game is the Nightmare. The Nightmare is kind of underwhelming, all things considered. It's a huge enemy that deals a lot of damage, but it's easy to outrun and kill. Killing it is never worth it cause it's a huge ammo sponge. It's meant more as a roadblock, but it feels like a 3-minute waste of time each time it arrives. The best part about the Typhon though is how their true goals are not known and probably not even understandable by humans. They make prey out of every human on the station. They work together as a whole unit, but they aren't really a cruel or malevolent force of evil. It's a well done force of nature kind of threat in Prey. There's some existential threat scariness to the Typhon, seeing just how fast they reproduce and how easily they take over the station, and the devastating consequences there could be if they made it onto Earth. But Prey doesn't turn into outright horror ever. Lead designer Ricardo Bear has said that they can't really control when the player goes where, so from early on they knew it wouldn't be an outright horror game. But the various powers of the Typhon is something the Talos One crew were trying to harvest for humans to use. And well, you can use almost all the powers the Typhons themselves use. It's great. You need Cybons to use the other meters beside health that you have in Prey. The most useful is probably mimicking a mimic. You can change your shape to become small and a tiny gap, or turn yourself into a turret to deal damage, or a robot to fly up above. Imagine if there was a pickle in the game though. You could literally become a pickle. Yeah, I'm not finishing that joke. There's the damage dealing Psycho Shock, which stops Typhons from using their ability, Super Thermal to lay exploding mines, remote manipulation to get items from far from your reach, and so on. Abilities can be mixed and matched for great effect too, like turning into an indestructible object using mimic powers and using explosive powers of the kinetic blast to launch yourself far away. There are a few small disadvantages to using Typhon powers, like turrets will attack you on sight thinking you are a Typhon, and you will encounter the nightmare more frequently. There's so many of these abilities that even with 2 full playthroughs and some way into the third one, I still haven't used all the powers extensively. In the No-Clip interview, Colantonio says, too many powers, which might be a bit true because some abilities like resistance, thermal or electrostatics ones aren't really that interesting, and I feel it's not the most useful either. There's also just more human powers that can be unlocked, more damage, more health, more heals, etc. But things like hacking and repairs or something like leverage that could be used to open unpowered door throws, let's remove heavy objects. But let's talk about recycling. Recycling in Prey is the way to get resources, and you will get massive amounts of material to recycle by exploring the level, killing enemies, and the recycler charges users. I am mixed on recycling as a mechanic. It gives purpose to all the materials in the game. It's a cool way to scrounge up resources when you're running low or want to head on into a fight well prepared, but the recipes are way too easy on crafting material by the very way they work. So it's really easy for the game to become unbalanced. The more you are likely to be someone who grabs everything, the easier the game becomes. And some materials like neuromods shouldn't have been craftable, and recycler charges should have had more of a cost associated with them, since you can easily just get more materials from a single use of them than it is required to craft them. And since you can already heal/fix your suits and fill your psi point pool with operators and craft things to do the same, which means that you are not really in much danger of running out. I would have loved it if operators were more needed to get through the game in a way. The survival mode can somewhat alleviate that, but it's pretty half-assed all things considered. It has new mechanics like oxygen weapon degradation, but there's no balancing changes to make it work. It's a fun time if you know the game well and are looking for a bit more of a challenge, but it's not really that good of a shake-up. In terms of completely being sucked in by a game, it can work by inducing a flow state, but the gameplay moment to moment is so engaging that you don't even have time to think about anything else. Games like Ultra Kill Prey sucks you in as well, but in a different way. It immerses the player in a world where there's hours of unbroken gameplay. Every system in Prey seems to work in unison to create one whole cohesive experience. All the little mechanics work with each other to create a whole greater than the sum of its parts. immersion in Prey doesn't come from being realistic, it comes from the systems working in an understandable, consistent way throughout the game. The computer screens in the games are tangible and real. The recycler you interact with produces items in real time. Your powers and weapons also affect the world in an understandable way. It's for this reason I have to criticize the hacking in this game. It's a mini game that pauses everything else when it happens. It plays like a cheaply made mobile game and takes me out of the game where all other systems are so well designed and polished. And in terms of minigame itself, it's up there with my least favorite one. I'm not a huge fan of Deus Ex Human Revolution, but this hacking doesn't pause everything else when it happens, unlike Prey's. Prey has objective markers which can be turned off, but they aren't really the ones that push you towards a single way of completing the objectives. Just point you towards them. I can keep them off, but that doesn't work in space, which is a shame because in early hardware labs you can easily see your goal, Dr. Calvino in space. It doesn't really work that well for later objectives on the outside, which sours me on the space a bit because movement and controls in space are great. Speaking of objectives though, there's pretty frequent backtracking in Prey. The well-connected stations of Prey makes those not too much of an issue. In fact, I liked visiting earlier areas for quests later with newer powers and finding hidden or inaccessible areas. All the objectives in Prey are very fun. Then there's some really creative ways to skip steps of them, like getting into Henrik Devries' office very early. The one part of Prey's quest where it seems to fumble is when it comes to NPC interactions. The line delivery is mediocre compared to the audio logs and they just stand there. The enemies in this game seemingly have more personality than the characters themselves.
These TranStar PPN-8 pistols are mostly for show. They don't do much against the attackers. With the Eradicator
Watching the main
turrets,
door.
we have a chance.
Dr. Yu, were you up in crew quarters? Have you seen any sign of my wife, Nicole? Last I heard from her, she was on her way there. If you find her, can you help get her here? The thought that she may have become one of those creatures,
Doing okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Yu, that was out of line. Forgive me.
Rose. Ow. Thank you.
Thank
you
you
for
for hear.
saving Officer Chaudhry, Dr. Yu.
The only NPC encounter that doesn't suffer from the issue is the one with Daniel's show, but that's because you never directly see her. Then there's the endgame of Prey. It hits you with so much bullshit ever respawning robots, it's really annoying. And they are on every single level, and you need to go through many different levels in this part of the game. This part is just straight up bad. It feels like trekking through leech-filled swamps wearing only socks. And I despise this, and that's the reason multiple of my Prey playthroughs have ended right before this part. This almost 2-3 hour section should be removed and the game would be better for it. But yeah, I guess it's finally time to talk about the story. After you get past the intro and into Prey proper, you are contacted by January. Having lost your memory, you see that January is an AI made for the sole purpose by you, and by that I mean Morgan Yu, to remind you of your goals when you lose your memory due to the neuromod tests. January tells you to destroy the station as the only way to prevent the Typhon from entering Earth, which has broken containment in Talos 1. Your brother Alex Yu opposes you and wants you to use a large nullwave device to kill the Typhon without destroying the station, as he believes the neuromod research in Talos 1 to be the next step in human evolution. So the choice is between what your past self thought was the way to save Earth and what your brother thinks might be the next evolutionary step of humans. But your past self isn't really you. I mean, it's Morgan Yu, but neuromod removal causes personality changes. So it's not even clear if that's what you would have actually done. It's a long journey to destroy the station or use the null wave, and in the way you can help the various NPCs you meet. And in the background we learn the grisly ways the neuromods are produced by sacrificing death row inmates to mimics, or the board of Transstar that literally calls for killing of anyone on board Talos 1 to protect its secrets. But it's the ending that makes the whole mind game aspect of Prey come together. In the post-credit scene, we see Alex standing with operators Dio Ikwe, Michaela Ilyushin, Daniel Shaw, and Sarah Elazar, judging you based on your action in the game. You are not Morgan Yu, but a Typhon implanted with the memories of Morgan Yu to see if you develop emotions or not. Typhons don't have mirror neurons, so they can't have empathy.
You know what we discovered? They lack mirror neurons. For all their wonderful abilities, there's one thing we can do that they can't. Empathize with the suffering of another living creature.
So this is one of Alex's experiments. It's kind of expected Prey would have this kind of twist, and I feel it's well done. And its final choice itself has no subtlety. You can either help create a medium between the Typhon and the humans, or you can just kill everyone. I can see why people would dislike the ending, but I think it fits Prey perfectly. So in the beginning of Prey, you're in a simulation inside a simulation, and the game itself is a simulation, so it's 3 layers deep. 4 if you consider human existence a simulation as well. Prey is one of my favorite games ever. It's certainly flawed, but it's such a well-crafted experience, unmatched in its world, that it doesn't lose its magic no matter how much I play. I would kill for more games like this. The upcoming System Shock remake has my attention in that regard, but it's also a remake. It's unlikely we will see a AAA budget space-based immersive sim anytime soon, and something that might match Prey's quality feels even further away. And I haven't even touched Moon Crash, the DLC that I feel on par with Prey's base game content and equally as creative. But that's for another day. I pray for a return of Prey, but at this point replays are keeping me satisfied.